They called it one of the most horrific crimes they had ever seen. And after hearing what happened, you'll understand why. Picture this, a frozen field in upstate New York. Silent, empty. But beneath that cold earth lies the body of Sam Nordquist, a young man whose final months were filled with cruelty so extreme. It's hard to believe another human could survive it as long as he did. This wasn't a sudden act of violence. It was slow, deliberate, day after day. A calculated breaking of a person's body and spirit. And the people who did it, they weren't strangers in the night, they were close, trusted, welcomed into Sam's life. By the time his body was found, the truth behind his suffering was so twisted, even veteran detectives struggled to read the reports. Tonight, I'm going to take you from the moment Sam stepped into that house, to the moment his story ended in that frozen field. And by the end, you won't just be shocked. You'll be questioning how evil can hide in plain sight, wearing a friendly smile. The wind cut across the flat expanse of Yates County like an uninvited intruder. It was February, the kind of winter that bites through layers, turning breath into clouds that vanish almost as soon as they form. The field lay silent, an endless stretch of pale frost and frozen soil. To most, it looked like nothing, an ordinary piece of land, barely worth a second glance. But on that morning, it became something else entirely. Two hunters had been moving along the tree line at the far edge of the property. They weren't looking for trouble, only for deer. But one of them noticed a patch of ground that seemed wrong. The frost was disturbed, the soil darker, softer. He almost didn't mention it, almost kept walking. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and something in his gut told him to take a closer look. Kneeling, he brushed away the loose dirt. The scent hit him first, faint but unmistakable, rot old and sour. His heart raced. With hands suddenly shaking, he pulled back more of the earth, revealing a pale shape, a human shape. The call to 911 came in just before 8 a.m. Within the hour, the field was alive with movement. Sheriff's deputies pushed up crime scene tape that fluttered in the wind. Detectives crouched over the shallow grave, their voices low. The body was wrapped in what looked like a thin, filthy blanket, the fabric stiff from the cold. Even in death, there was something about the way it was positioned that told a story, one that no one wanted to hear. The coroner's team worked methodically, peeling back the layers of dirt and frozen cloth. When they finally saw the victim's face, the air seemed to shift. This wasn't just another statistic. This was a young man, his features locked in an expression that seemed to capture both agony and relief. His name would come later, Sam Nordquist, but in that moment, to the officers gathered there, he was simply the body in the field. The questions came quickly, but the answers would be slower, darker, and far more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. Because finding Sam was only the beginning. The truth about how he ended up here would reveal a nightmare that had been playing out for months. One hidden behind closed doors, shielded by silence, and ignored by those who should have seen it coming. Before the headlines, before the shallow grave in Yates County, Sam Nordquist was just Sam. A young man trying to find his place in a world that didn't always make it easy for people like him. Born in Minnesota, Sam's early years were defined by small-town rhythms. Summer fairs, frozen lakes in winter, and neighbors who knew everyone's business. Friends would later describe him as quiet but warm, someone who didn't take up much space in a room, yet somehow made people feel noticed when he spoke to them. He had a habit of asking questions that made others pause, as if he was always trying to see beyond the surface. Sam was a transgender man, and though he carried that truth with quiet pride, it wasn't without its challenges. In certain circles, acceptance was conditional, and support came wrapped in unspoken rules. But Sam wasn't naive, he knew the landscape. He moved through it with a cautious grace, navigating friendships, work, and the slow process of becoming fully himself. In his mid-20s, he began feeling the pull to leave Minnesota. The decision wasn't sudden. It was a slow build of wanting something different, somewhere new. The promise of New York, with its vastness and anonymity, felt like a clean slate. Friends said he was chasing opportunity. Sam himself said he was chasing freedom. The move took him to a small town in upstate New York, The kind of place where the winters were long, the rent was cheaper, and the neighbors still waved when you passed. It was here, through a web of acquaintances, that he met the people who would ultimately bring him into their orbit. They didn't seem dangerous. If anything, they seemed ordinary. They offered him a place to stay while he got settled, a gesture that felt generous at the time. But generosity can be a mask, and trust, once given, can be the most dangerous currency of all. In the early weeks, nothing seemed off. Sam was settling in, working odd jobs, talking about saving up for his own place. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tone in the house began to change. The warmth cooled. Conversations became sharper, loaded with undercurrents he couldn't quite name. Looking back, friends would remember moments that seemed small at the time. A text that went unanswered for days, an excuse about why he couldn't meet up, a visible tension in his voice during the rare phone calls he made. No one knew it then, but the trap had already begun to close. And once it did, there would be no easy way out. At first, the house was just a place to sleep, a temporary stop on Sam's way to independence. It was old, creaking in the wind, with peeling paint on the siding and floors that groaned underfoot. But it was warm, and in the dead of a New York winter, that counted for a lot. The people he was staying with, a couple in their early 30s, presented themselves as laid-back, a little rough around the edges, but harmless. They joked easily, offered him coffee in the mornings, and seemed genuinely glad for the company. Sam thought he'd lucked out, but kindness can have a half-life. And in that house, it began to decay quickly. The change started small. Comments about the chores he hadn't done. Questions about where he went during the day. Jokes that cut a little too close to the bone. There was always laughter afterwards, but the laughter didn't soften the sting. It just made it harder to call it out. The boundaries blurred. They borrowed his things without asking. They'd keep him awake at night with loud arguments, then expect him to help around the house as if nothing had happened. When Sam protested, the responses were subtle but sharp. If you don't like it, you know where the door is. The problem was, Sam didn't really have anywhere else to go, and they knew it. Control became a quiet current running through the house. They started locking certain doors. They'd hide food. They kept tabs on who he spoke to, when he left, when he came back. At first, Sam brushed it off, told himself it was temporary, that they were just particular people. But slowly, those patterns became chains. One night, he overheard them talking about him in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but the words carried, "He's too soft. We can toughen him up." It wasn't said like a joke. That was the first time Sam felt a pit in his stomach, a whisper of something darker just beneath the surface. The next day, when he woke, one of them had gone through his bag. His journal was open on the table, his handwriting there for anyone to read. They didn't apologize. In fact, they smiled. And somewhere deep inside, Sam began to realize the truth. He wasn't just living with them. He was trapped with them. Winter in upstate New York is long, but for Sam Nordquist, those months inside the house stretched into something far worse than the season itself. By February, the cold outside was nothing compared to the cold he felt in that house. The first time it turned physical was almost casual. A shove in the kitchen during an argument over dishes. Could have been brushed off as an accident, but the smirk that followed told Sam otherwise. The next time it was a slap, then a punch to the arm. Then the blows stopped being hidden at all. They began to treat his pain as entertainment. When Sam flinched, they laughed. When he tried to leave a room, they blocked the doorway. They took his phone, claiming he didn't need distractions. They timed how long it took him to respond when they called his name, punishing him if it wasn't fast enough. But physical abuse was only one part of it. The psychological cruelty was worse. They mocked his identity, turned his vulnerabilities into weapons. They'd whisper things to each other while staring at him, laughing at jokes he wasn't in on. Food became scarce, not because they didn't have it, but because they decided when he deserved to eat. Then came the objects. A table leg, a stick, things no one should ever see as instruments of pain. The attacks were methodical, deliberate. Sometimes they made him clean up after his own injuries. Sometimes they'd leave him in the cold without a jacket, watching from the doorway as he shivered. He stopped speaking much, stopped asking for anything. It was safer to be invisible, to keep his eyes down, to try to shrink into himself until the moments passed. But invisibility doesn't work when your tormentors enjoy the hunt. What's most haunting is that it wasn't every minute of every day. There were breaks, days when things seemed almost normal. And that made it worse, because every time he thought maybe it was over, maybe they'd stopped, the next wave would hit even harder. By then, Sam wasn't thinking about moving into his own place anymore. He was thinking about survival, and even that was starting to feel like a luxury he couldn't afford much longer. By the time February bled into its final days, Sam was a shadow of himself. The bruises faded slower now. His movements were smaller, weaker. Speaking seemed to take effort. The couple no longer pretended to be kind. The mask had slipped completely. They didn't just hurt him, they talked about it like it was a shared project, a thing they were building together. And the building was his breaking. One night, the temperature outside plunged well below freezing. They dragged him into the unheated back room. No blankets, no light, and left him there. The cold seeped into his bones. Time blurred. Hunger gnawed at him, but thirst was worse. At some point, they came back, not with water, but with a plastic jug filled with a liquid that burned his throat. Bleach. He gagged, choked, but they stood there until he swallowed. After that, the days ran together. There were more beatings, more humiliation. He was forced to clean while bleeding, to endure attacks without resistance. Every attempt to stand up for himself was met with worse violence. And then, one night, the violence didn't stop. Whether it was one final blow, the slow accumulation of injuries, or the poison of what they'd made him drink, Sam's body gave out. The couple didn't call for help. They didn't even check if he was still breathing for long. They simply looked at each other, the weight of what they'd done hanging in the air, and began to plan. The plan was crude but efficient. They wrapped his body in an old, stained blanket. They waited until the early hours, when the roads were empty and the fields lay silent. They drove him out into the countryside, headlights cutting through the cold mist. The spot they chose was unremarkable, an open patch near a tree line. The ground was frozen, but they worked quickly, scraping a shallow grave into the soil. It wasn't deep. It wasn't careful. It was just enough to hide him. They covered the dirt with frost-crusted grass, threw the tools into the back of the truck, and drove away. By sunrise, the only sign anything had happened was the uneven patch of ground, waiting for someone to notice. For days, no one did. When the hunters in Yates County stumbled across that disturbed patch of earth, they had no idea what they were uncovering. Within hours, the field became a hive of activity. Flashing lights, the hum of police radios, the muffled voices of investigators trying to make sense of the scene. It didn't take long for the coroner to confirm the obvious. The body was that of a young man, wrapped hastily in a filthy blanket. But the real horror came in the days that followed, when the autopsy revealed injuries that told a story more chilling than anyone expected. The list was long: fractures, deep bruising, burns, signs of prolonged malnutrition, and traces of toxic substances in his system. It was clear this was not the work of a single violent moment, but of months of sustained abuse. Through a mix of forensic evidence and witness accounts, detectives traced Sam's last days to the couple's house. The arrests came swiftly. Mugshots hit the local news, two faces that, to anyone passing them on the street, might have seemed ordinary. But the charges told a different story. Kidnapping, torture, murder. News of the case spread quickly, first across the region, then the country. For many, it was the brutality of the crime that drew shock. For others, it was the fact that it happened in plain sight, that neighbors, acquaintances, and even passersby had missed the signs. Vigils were held in both New York and Minnesota. Friends lit candles, clutched photos, and spoke about the person Sam had been. Not just the victim of a horrific crime, but a son, a friend, someone with dreams that would now never be realized. The LGBTQ+ community rallied for justice, framing Sam's death as part of a larger conversation about the violence faced by transgender people. Activists demanded better protections, better systems for recognizing and intervening in abuse. The trial would be long, the details gut-wrenching. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already clear. What happened to Sam Nordquist was not just a tragedy, it was a failure. A failure of people to see, to speak, to act. And for those who had the stomach to read the full details, one question lingered. If evil like this can exist in the warmth of a home, hidden behind friendly smiles, how many other doors hide stories we'll never know? For more chilling true crime stories like this, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And don't forget, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about this case? Could it have been prevented? Let's talk about it in the comments.